For one whole year, there had been abuse. Then something changed. The predator needed more, and he ultimately kidnapped his victim. Sending the boy's parents into free fall with no hope of seeing their son again, the Plauche family waited for each phone call to find out where their son was now. As the kidnapper crossed state lines, the police actioned a full-blown manhunt. So many stories of kidnapping end in tragedy, but this story is about a father's defiance and ultimately taking control of a horrific situation. This story comes with a warning. Jeff Doucet was born in Port Arthur, Texas in 1959. He had, from the limited accounts, an unstable upbringing, which resulted in abuse from a young age. Forever changed by this, it appears history would go on to repeat itself, and a young Jeff, unable to stop the evil of the past, continued to behave like the monsters he had escaped from. Jeff moved around a lot, and he was even charged with abuse in one state, but somehow his record was wiped clean. In early 1983, at the age of 24, a young Jeff Doucet made Baton Rouge, Louisiana his new home. He tried to settle into the community and became a karate instructor. Life was okay, but not great. He was lonely and struggled to make friends his own age. He ended up spending more time with his young students, who would love it when their karate teacher would take them to the movies or out to play video games together. This is where the relationships with his students began to change. There were two boys in particular that Jeff spent the most time with. That was Jody and Mikey Plauche. The two boys came from a split family, and Jeff just seemed to slip into a role model position for the boys. Jeff even got along so well with the parents that Judy and Gary Plauche even invited Jeff over for dinner. He then became an accepted part of the family and began spending a lot of time with the Plauche family. By March 1983, Jeff changed his relationship with Jody forever. He had begun to abuse his young student. During the next year, Jody remained silent about anything that happened. As Jeff was his karate teacher, there were always events, competitions, training, and away meetings. This would go on for a year before Jeff would make his ultimate move. In February 1984, Jeff was not making enough money or was involved in something else, but he was arrested on charges of cashing bad checks. Jody's parents, Judy and Gary, at this stage were still completely unaware of who their son had really been spending time with. Just before he was to be charged for the bad checks crime, Jeff appeared at the family home and took young Jody on the premise of running errands. In reality, Jeff had kidnapped Jody and was on the run. First stop was at Jeff's mother's house in Port Arthur. The pair then carried on via New Mexico, then Arizona, to the ultimate destination of Anaheim, California. By this stage, the police had begun searching the entire country for him. Unaware of the large manhunt, Jeff took Jody to Disneyland, and on a few occasions even allowed Jody to call his mother. The entire time, Jeff had been passing Jody off as his son and taking part in many family activities. It was said around this time, Jeff's mind was becoming unstable, perhaps due to the mental strain of keeping up appearances while knowing his days with Jody were limited. The pair had now been missing for 10 days, and on February 29th, Jody was allowed once again to call his mother. It was this time the police were able to trace the call. The California Police Department traced the pair to the Anaheim hotel where Jeff was arrested without incident. Jody was returned to his family on March 1st, 1984, nearly 1 year after his trauma had begun. Upon learning via the media what his son had been through, Gary Plauche said, he felt a sense of helplessness upon hearing of these reports. What was not reported was the rage, fury, disgust, and vengeance that Gary had inside of him. As in many situations, the victim and victims' families must allow the wheels of justice to turn, however hard it must be. But this father was taking matters into his own hands. On March 16, 1984, Jeff Doucet was transported from California to Baton Rouge, Louisiana, to be charged with aggravated kidnapping. What no one knew was that Gary was also waiting for him. Disguised under a baseball cap and glasses, Gary waited at the Baton Rouge Metropolitan Airport, along with the police and TV crews. He stood, leaning against the payphones, speaking to his best friend as he watched a television crew set up for the arrival of Jeff. It turns out an employee of the local ABC affiliate had let Gary know when and where Jeff would be arriving, not realizing the course of action Gary would take. At approximately 9:30 a.m., Jeff, in handcuffs, was escorted through the airport and to his fate. As Jeff passed the payphones, Gary stepped forward and fired. With his goal achieved, Gary stood back, placed the weapon back up on the payphone, and held his hands up. He was immediately arrested. Upon placing him against the wall, the police recognized Gary and were heard saying, "Why, Gary? Why, Gary?" Jeff was pronounced dead the next day after never regaining consciousness. Gary was charged with second-degree murder. He would plead no contest to the charges. Psychological reports helped Gary's case after it was learned that Jeff Doucet had abused Jody months prior to the kidnapping. Edward P. Uzzi examined Gary and determined that he could not tell the difference between right and wrong when he killed Jeff Doucet. Gary's defense team argued that he was driven to a temporarily psychotic state after learning of the abuse of his son. Uzzi also determined that Jeff Doucet had the ability to manipulate others and took advantage of the fact that Gary Plauche was separated from his wife at the time and had managed to wedge his way into the Plauche family. Judge Frank Saya ruled that sending Plauche to prison would not help anyone, and that there was virtually no risk of him committing another crime. Gary was sentenced to 7 years suspended sentence, with 5 years probation and 300 hours of community service, which he completed in 1989. Gary would go on in later years to confirm that he would still have done the same thing. He sadly passed away in 2014 after suffering a stroke. He was just shy of 69. Jody, the victim in this situation, would go on to remain silent during the entire ordeal. It was not until as an adult that he spoke out about this time and how he really felt about the situation. Jody released a book to help other victims of abuse and to tell his side of the story. Jody still remembers the first time seeing the footage of his father on the news. Watching it, he could really not believe it was real. He would then become obsessed with the footage and would watch it over and over. Initially, upon hearing that Jeff had died, Jody was said to have burst into tears and felt mad that his dad had killed Jeff. He had wanted the abuse to stop, but not for a man to die. Even though he lived it, Jody does not agree with those who think of his dad as a hero for his act of vigilante justice. "I think for a lot of people who have not been satisfied by the American justice system, my dad stands as a symbol of justice," he said. "My dad did what everybody says they would do, yet only a few have done it. Plus, he didn't go to jail. That said, I cannot and will not condone his behavior. I understand why he did what he did, but it is more important for a parent to be there to help support their child than put themselves in a place to be prosecuted." Even though his son was now home and safe, the aftermath of the shooting was harder to navigate than the family expected. The relationship between Gary and his son Jody would take a while to heal. It took a few months before things got back to normal. As far as regret, of course he regrets the whole thing happened, but he never regretted his action, Jody told the Sun. Being Catholic, I believe having taken a human life, his first thoughts were that he was going to hell, and he was okay with that. But the local priest washed his feet and gave his absolution and forgiveness from God, so I think that helped him mentally deal with the event. What do you think about the actions that Gary took? As a parent, keeping your children safe is priority one, and when this type of terrifying ordeal happens, you'll never know what it's like to deal with these emotions. As Jody is proof, life goes on, and families move on and try to heal the wounds. Some will never heal, but for victims that can return home, they'll fight for a new life.